How to fight corruption? Put 3 of your friends in jail. Need economic growth? Then it's better not to go to war with your neighbors, but to trade with them. How to succeed when resources are scarce? You must work hard and rely only on yourself. All these wisdoms were born in a small country that just 50 years ago was considered an artificial creation, without its own people, without natural resources, and surrounded by unfriendly neighbors. No one believed in Singapore's future except Singapore itself. Here, corruption will be defeated. Here, the largest companies in the world will come to do business, and the country's residents will become richer, more educated, and live better with each passing year. This is Singapore at the time of its independence. A typical Asian picture with slums and poverty. Why? Well, because Singapore essentially has nothing, neither natural resources that can be reliably sold like oil or gas, nor a territory of normal size. The state doesn't even reach any major city. Moreover, it lacks the basics. This includes fresh water and even food. That's why people live there in poverty. For perspective, the GDP per capita, essentially the main indicator of the success of any economy, in Singapore at that time was only $400, slightly more than in Costa Rica, even less than in Jamaica. At the same time, Singapore has a fantastic geographical location, right on the main trade route from Europe to Asia. Essentially, the British came up with Singapore during the East India Company era to facilitate trade. And a couple of decades later, this place becomes the main hub of the British Crown in the Far East. So this is because colonial authorities declared it a free port, so meaning there are no tariffs or taxes. Consequently, more traders arrive there and more goods pass through Singapore.
It happened in Singapore but a short while ago.
But after World War II, the British Empire finally collapses and the colonies gain independence. India, African countries, Malaysia and Singapore as well. And when a major power withdraws, someone else wants to take its place. So, compared to its neighbors, nearly 100 million strong Indonesia or 10 million strong Malaysia, Singapore is small and weak. Moreover, it has a lot of problems. For instance, housing, or rather, it's all slums, and unemployment is around 10 or 12%. Plus, there is essentially no unified Singaporean nation. The population of the country at that time consisted of 75% Chinese, 13% Malays, and 8% Indians. So there were essentially no Singaporeans in Singapore. Naturally, most people didn't believe that the country would survive and remain independent. But everything changed with this man, Lee Kuan Yew. Over his 30-year rule from 1959 to 1990, he transformed Singapore from an outsider into the most prosperous country in Asia and the world. How did he do it? The first principle: don't ask for help, offer it instead. In the 20th century, there is a resource that everyone needs: oil. But remember, Singapore has no oil. Disaster. Yet, such big And respected oil companies as Shell, Assa, and others come to the country one after another, not just to sell their gasoline. So what are they doing in Singapore if there is no oil there? Well, the local government offers very favorable conditions for opening oil refineries. Remember their excellent geographical location and the fact that Singapore has always been a free port.
Singapore's a free port, of course, so there's no duty on goods.
As a result, Singapore becomes one of the largest centers of oil refining in the world. But not only in the oil sector. Lee Kuan Yew wrote, "We grabbed onto any idea that could create new jobs and provide people with means of existence." A vivid example: Singapore welcomes even a small company from Norway that wants to produce fish hooks there. As a result, several hundred new jobs are created every year. Millions of hooks of all shapes and sizes. But let's agree, you can't build a powerful economy on fish hooks alone. You need to somehow persuade large multinational corporations to come there. And that's why Singapore creates a separate economic development board. It seeks investors all over the world and solves any issues for those who can invest money in the country. And here is the second principle. Invest where breakthroughs are possible. In 1969, three crucial things happened for civilization. A man lands on the moon, scientists for the first time connect two remote computers, thus creating a prototype of the future internet, and third, engineers from Silicon Valley place the first microprocessor on a thin plate, so the digital revolution begins. But Singapore manages to make a breakthrough exactly a year before these landmark events. In October 1968, a delegation from Texas Instruments arrives on the islands, and they are looking for a place where it's profitable and convenient for them to produce their semiconductors, microelectronics. They become the first to open a factory in Singapore. Within a year, HP does the same, and then even General Electric. And just a decade later, when the computer boom starts around the world, Singapore will already be one of the largest exporters of microelectronics. And at the same time, a new global financial center begins to grow here. So the logic is simple. The financial world wakes up in Zurich. Well, banks open at 9 a.m. Then banks open in London, and a little later in New York. When everything closes in Zurich, financial flows from London and New York are already moving to San Francisco. And here is the problem. When banks in San Francisco close, banks in Zurich are still not open, meaning nothing is happening in the financial world. And here is where Singapore fits perfectly into this scheme. While banks in San Francisco are still open, Singapore takes over from them. And when banks in Singapore close, they can transfer financial flows to Zurich. Thus, the circle is complete, launching global round-the-clock banking services for the first time in history. The third principle. Talented people are the most valuable asset a country has. Lee Kuan Yew does everything to make Singapore an oasis for people from developed countries. So Singapore has a great location and climate, but to attract entrepreneurs from places like the UK or the US, the healthcare, education, security, transport, and service sectors need to be just as good as in those countries. But for that to happen, Singaporeans themselves need to meet those standards, which means providing them with good education and decent wages. And the key decision here is to focus on the English language in both business and education. Otherwise, the country simply wouldn't survive if people here communicated and learned only in Chinese, Malay, or Tamil. As Lee Kuan Yew says, everyone should learn English, and their native language should become the second language. English solves two important tasks for the country. First, it unites Singapore's diverse ethnicities, and second, it becomes a ticket to the world of international business, diplomacy, science, and technology. And then, Singaporean authorities introduced another cool principle that American companies very love: the green harvest. When the most promising students from different countries are offered jobs in Singapore even before graduation exams. So it's natural that many like it and choose to stay. The fourth principle. Even a small authority creates incentives for its misuse. Yes, you've probably heard that Singapore has defeated corruption. Although by Asian standards, they also love to give, take, and hide bribes of any size. And the first thing Singapore does is to consider practically anything with any value as a bribe. Second, if the court sees that you are living beyond your means with a house, car, or watch that's too expensive, the prosecution doesn't need to prove anything. The mere fact that you somehow acquired it proves that you are taking bribes. Third, investigators have ample opportunities to check not only the official, but also their entire circle: spouses, children, agents, relatives. Fourth, lines for corruption increased from an impressive 10,000 Singapore dollars to a whopping 100,000. So anyone who hides information about bribes or tries to confuse the investigation receives huge fines or goes to jail. And fifth, most importantly, local officials at some point become the highest paid in the world. So it's simply not profitable or safe for them to take bribes. The fifth principle. Every citizen has a share in the country's wealth and a place in its future. One of the main problems of early Singapore was the appalling housing conditions, the slums. There were many of them, and they were very large. To give you an idea, in 1961, just one fire destroyed an entire block and left 16,000 people homeless immediately. And Lee Kuan Yew had a solution to this. He wanted to build quality social housing for people and ensure that residents didn't just rent it, but became owners. In the end, over 30 years, Singapore will build 750,000 apartments through various government programs, and only 9% of them will be rented out. The rest will be inhabited by owners. Naturally, Singapore didn't become a paradise on earth. The higher the salary and standard of living, the higher the prices. Today, Singapore ranks third among the most expensive cities in the world. Only Tel Aviv and Paris are more expensive to live in. However, the salary in Singapore is higher than in these two cities, on average by $1,000. Plus, Singapore remains one of the leaders in places where it's easiest to start and run a business. Low taxes and fair competition attract companies and money from all over the world. So Singapore continued to grow economically and, by the way, physically. Here, like in Dubai, land is reclaimed from the sea, literally creating artificial islands. We had no natural resources. We only had people living on a small, strategically important piece of land. Remember, people are the most important thing.